Hello, and welcome back to Tales from Vietnam's Darkness, the place where ancient stones whisper their darkest secrets. Tonight, we're taking a deep dive into the chilling heart of Europe, the infamous Black Forest, to uncover a story of architectural dread, unholy rituals, and a soul trapped for 2 centuries. Forget simple haunting. This is about Black Alchemy, an obsession with immortality, and a terrifying revelation hidden within the walls of a forgotten structure. Prepare yourself for the Whispering Abbey in the Black Forest. Meet Elias Richter, a skeptical preservation architect who believed every crack in the stone had a logical explanation. Until he stepped foot inside St. Aegidius. He quickly learned that this abbey wasn't just haunted, it was the ghost itself. This is a journey into the terrifying truth that some buildings are not just structures of matter, but vessels for eternal pain. Settle in, turn off the lights, and remember to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our next deep dives into darkness. Now, let the terror begin. The Whispering Abbey in the Black Forest. Forward. This story follows Elias Richter, a young, skeptical preservation architect, tasked with evaluating the abandoned St. Aegidius Abbey deep within the Black Forest. The place was not abandoned due to plague or war, but due to a dark secret buried over centuries, a secret concerning Abbess Isolde's obsession with immortality and an unbreakable curse. Chapter 1. The Gloom of St. Aegidius. Elias Richter was a man of facts. To him, every structure could be explained by gravity, building materials, and recorded history. He never believed in legends or ghosts, even while working amidst Europe's most ancient ruins. This week, his latest project was St. Aegidius Abbey. It lay deep in a remote area of the Black Forest, near the German-French border, a place where even GPS struggled to connect. Elias's client, a private equity firm, wanted to know if the crumbling abbey could be converted into a luxury resort. A nearly impossible task, but with a generous fee, Elias was willing to accept. As his old Land Rover passed through the moss-covered stone gate, the air immediately became heavy and eerily quiet. St. Aegidius Abbey was not just a ruin, it was a silence built of stone. The gray sandstone walls were tightly gripped by vines, and the towering Gothic arch windows were now just empty sockets staring blankly at the overcast sky. According to records, the abbey was abandoned in the late 18th century. The official reason: religious decline and financial insolvency. The unofficial reason, as locals whispered, the cold came from within. Elias stepped out of the car. The sound of the car door slamming echoed jarringly in the stillness. He put on his backpack, turned on his high-powered flashlight, and began his work. The smell of mildew, clay, and stale incense assaulted his nose. He walked through the main hall. Each step he took on the broken pavement was amplified, as if someone were watching and repeating the sound at a safe distance. The most intriguing area was the abbess's quarter. A small library was surprisingly well preserved, although many books had rotted. Elias found an old diary, bound in pigskin, written in Latin and Gothic German, signed by Abbess Isolde. Isolde was the last person to leave the abbey before its official closure. St. Aegidius, Elias mumbled, opening his notepad. Everything seems better preserved than it should be. As night fell, his surveying and photography work led him to the chapel area. This was the heart of the abbey, where secrets were often buried. The moment he stepped onto the stone altar platform, he heard it. A faint whispering, like wind slipping through the stone cracks, yet bearing the cadence of prayer. It was Latin. Dominus vobiscum, Elias tried to translate, "The Lord be with you." He shook his head. Surely it was just wind drafting through an old chimney. He was an architect, not a mystic. He continued working, but the whispering lingered at the edge of his hearing, never loud enough to clearly discern, just enough to send a chill down his spine. That was the first night. Chapter 2, The Crypt and Isolde's Vow. The next day, Elias focused on mapping the cellars. St. Aegidius Abbey had a more complex network of tunnels and subterranean chambers than the old blueprints suggested. He found a trapdoor concealed beneath a rotten rug in the old kitchen area. After prying it open with a crowbar, a spiral stone staircase appeared, leading down to a space pitch black and chillingly cold. Second cellar level, Elias noted. As he descended, the air was not just cold, it was painful, an unnatural chill that pierced through his thick coat. There was no usual moldy smell, instead, an indescribable scent, like sulfur, dried lavender, and iron. The bottom chamber was circular, seemingly built later than the original Gothic structure. In the center was a large stone platform, covered in dust and a dark brown, dried liquid that Elias dared not speculate on. The walls were inscribed with symbols he had never seen in any religious building. They were interlocking circles, inverted triangles, and distorted room-like characters. This was no wine cellar or storage room. This was a place of worship, but not of God. Between the walls, Elias found a sealed stone niche. He used a crowbar and several hours of strenuous effort to break it open. Inside was a small, perfectly preserved wooden box. Inside the box was Abbess Isolde's second diary, written on parchment and wrapped in a piece of dried, stained linen cloth. This diary was different. It didn't speak of Abbey life, but of desire and the exchange. Elias began to translate, his mind rapidly shifting from skepticism to confusion. God has forsaken us. He allowed decay to take hold of his flesh. But Aegidius, our great founder, promised an everlasting kingdom. I must find the key. The key is not faith, but the transmutation. I found the ancient formula in the forbidden book. It demands a sacrifice. A sacrifice not of life, but of purity. The thing men call Alchemia Nigra, Black Alchemy. The young girl, Margarita, has been chosen. She is the perfect vessel, untouched by the world's sin. Her blood shall not be spilled, but her soul must be freed into the connecting material. Elias felt nauseous. Isolde was not just a fanatic, she was a heretic, one who had practiced some form of dark magic. What was the connecting material? Was it that stone platform? At that moment, the whispering reappeared, louder and closer. It was not the wind. It was a choir of voices, emanating from the stone walls. This time, Elias could clearly hear one word repeated. Reverter. Reverter. I shall return. Elias hurriedly left the room, slamming the trapdoor shut. He no longer cared about the work. He just wanted to leave this abbey. Chapter 3, Shadow on the Stone. And the suspended moment, Elias tried to maintain his composure. He told himself it was just an old abbey, and horror stories were the only way the locals could explain the decay. Yet, he had spent his life studying buildings, and never had a structure felt so alive as St. Aegidius. He spent the afternoon researching documents on Margarita, the girl mentioned by Isolde. Records showed Margarita was a young novice, noted as disappeared in 1778, just months before the abbey's official closure. On the third night, Elias decided to sleep in his car, away from the chill of the stone walls. But even from the outside, he couldn't escape it. Around 2 a.m., he was awakened by an absolute silence. It was not the usual tranquility of the forest. It was an active absence of sound. The buzzing of insects, the hooting of owls, the rustling of leaves, all were sucked into an invisible void. Elias felt like his eardrums were stretched taut, and the pressure in his head increased, making him faintly realize that this silence was a scream. Elias looked up at the abbey. The main chapel, with its soaring Gothic arch windows, suddenly lit up. Not electric light. It was a faint, bluish glow, like moonlight through thick mist, but the light was colder than anything he had ever felt. It didn't just illuminate, it seemed to freeze the air. Elias grabbed his camera and telephoto lens, his mind battling between the scientist and the terrified man. It's a pressure phenomenon, he tried to rationalize, just diffused light. When he looked through the lens, his reason shattered. He saw a figure inside the chapel. It was a female figure, tall and slender, standing at the altar platform, the exact spot where he had stood. The figure wore a gray nun's habit, but it wasn't made of cloth. The body seemed composed of cold mist and fine ash particles suspended in the air. The most terrifying thing was its movement. The figure was completely still, like a statue carved from frozen air, but it distorted the space around it. The bluish light seemed to bend when it touched the figure, creating a strange visual vibration, like looking into a frozen lake. Elias tried to focus on the details. He was an architect. He looked for logic. He grabbed his binoculars and looked straight. There was no shadow. The bluish light illuminated the entire chapel, but there was not a single shadow cast beneath the figure's feet. It was a blatant violation of physics, a hole in the natural law. Even from a distance, Elias could feel the emptiness the figure generated. It was not the emptiness of a dead person, but the emptiness of an object that had been stripped of everything. Then, the figure turned its head, facing him, the man hidden in the darkness. It had no eyes. Where the face should have been was just a flat, dark hollow, without features, without sockets or jawline. It was an absence of a face. But in that instant, Elias felt like 10,000 eyes were staring at him. It was not vision, it was a direct transmission of pain and despair. The weight pressing on Elias's chest was not gravity. It was the weight of time trapped. He felt himself being dragged into a loop of sacrifice and betrayal. Elias dropped the binoculars. He gasped, and his breath instantly froze, dissipating into a thin fog inside the cab. He was no longer skeptical. He had seen the truth. This entity was pure suffering, imprisoned in stone. A faint sob, not of sound but of psychological vibration, echoed in his mind, carrying images of icy chains wrapped around a heart. Elias snatched the camera, his hands trembling. He had to take a picture. Proof. Science needed to record it. But as he raised the camera, the figure seemed to act. The nearest stone wall of the abbey, about 50 meters away from him, suddenly let out a small crack, sound, like a bone breaking. A new fissure appeared, running along the mortar line. And right after that, the bluish light from the chapel abruptly went out, fast as a flash. The silence was broken by the sudden, loud return of insect noises. Elias backed up, hitting the car door. His forehead was soaked with cold sweat. He opened the door and threw himself back into the car. He checked the binoculars again. There was a thick layer of condensation on the lenses, but strangely, it wasn't melting. Elias wiped it with his finger and realized it wasn't water vapor. It was a layer of very fine, damp ash, similar to what he had seen in Isolde's box. The car was his last fortress. He closed all doors, locked them centrally, and started the engine. He needed to get away, but an inexplicable force was holding him back. He looked at the abbey, now once again a silent, dark mass of stone. Elias knew he couldn't leave. If he left, no one could free Margarita. He had seen a ghost, and that ghost had seen him. Chapter 4: The Consequence of False Immortality. Elias didn't leave. His skepticism had transformed into the furious urge of a scientist who must decode a phenomenon. He needed to understand what Isolde did and why. He returned to the circular cellar, now in daylight. He checked the central stone platform once more. This time, he noticed a small crack on the side. Beneath the crack, he found a carved Latin passage, seemingly Isolde's final explanation. To sustain Aegidius's material body, the soul of purity had to be rerouted. I made a terrible mistake. When I separated Margarita's soul from her body, it did not ascend. It became trapped within the building. Her soul became the eyes, and her suffering became the foundation. The abbey is not cursed, it is resurrected. The voices of the sisters, Reverter, are not a call to return, but a call to repeat. They are trapped in the moment of sacrifice, and their whispering is a distorted prayer. Elias understood. Isolde didn't create a wandering spirit, she had turned the entire St. Aegidius Abbey into a living vessel. Margarita's soul had merged with the walls, the corridors, the stone foundations. The abbey had no ghosts. The abbey was the ghost. This explained why he felt the cold to his bones. It was the temperature of a dead person held within the stone. It explained why the whispering was only a meaningless choir. It was the echo of the nuns trapped in an eternal loop. He looked at the wooden box, the one Isolde used to contain the connecting material. He turned it over. At the bottom of the box was a layer of fine gray ash. He reached out and touched it. It felt like touching freezing air and fine sand at the same time. As his finger touched the ash, a surge of cold electricity shot through his arm, and a series of images flashed in his mind. A dark room, suffocated screams. The hollow, frightened face of a young girl. Isolde, with wildly burning eyes, raising the wooden box. And then, darkness. Darkness with shape, consuming Isolde. The ash was the residue of Isolde herself, consumed by her own creation after completing the ritual. She wasn't the vessel, Elias whispered, she was the switch. Chapter 4. 5. The mysteries of Black Alchemy. After touching Isolde's remains, Elias's mind was flooded with fragments of memories and painful understanding. He realized he wasn't just reading history, he was tasting it. Isolde was no ordinary nun. She was an intellectual, a woman who always viewed the material as secondary to the eternity of the spirit. She had lost faith in personal salvation but clung to the belief in the perpetuity of the cult of St. Aegidius, a cult she believed had been abandoned by the Orthodox Church. In the Abbey library, Elias found a hidden niche, containing the book Isolde called the Forbidden Book, De Edificiis Aeternis, on eternal structures. It was an ancient document, banned since the 13th century, containing alchemical formulas not aimed at turning lead into gold, but at transforming finite matter, stone, mortar, wood, into eternal matter by binding it to a pure soul. The Black Alchemy ritual, Alchemia Nigra, was not murder, but a metaphysical transmutation, which, according to Isolde, was the distillation of the soul. 3 pillars of the ritual. The anchor, Ancora. There must be a sacred and indestructible object of the founder. Isolde had used a finger bone of St. Aegidius, as discovered in Chapter 6. This object was the physical key, preventing the structure from dissolving. The vessel, Vass a completely unblemished soul. Margarita, a 16-year-old orphan girl, was chosen by Isolde for her innocence and blind faith. She was the spiritual energy, the electric arc to provide life. The connecting material, Nexus St. Aegidius Abbey itself. The ritual did not take place on the altar, but on the circular stone platform in the cellar, a massive alembic secretly built over years, designed by Isolde to absorb and lock spiritual energy. Elias looked at the stone platform, now knowing that the dried dark brown liquid on it was not blood, but a mixture of holy oil, communion wine, and some kind of biological fluid, perhaps tears, sweat, or spinal fluid, used to create spiritual conductivity for the platform. In the sequence of fleeting images Elias received from the box of ash, he saw Margarita's final moments. Margarita did not resist. She believed she was undergoing a high sacrifice ritual, a unification with St. Aegidius. Isolde, in her magnificent abbess robes, placed the girl on the stone platform. As Isolde read the prayers in reversed Latin, Black Mass, Margarita merely closed her eyes. But when the soul was pulled from the body, it was not the relief Isolde expected. It was a violent tearing. Margarita's soul, like a beam of white light, was pulled into the stone, into the mortar, into every crack of the abbey. At the same time, darkness began to envelop Isolde. She had not foreseen the price of this intervention. The stolen soul created a new entity, the resurrected abbey, and that entity needed to consume the one who created it. The final image Elias saw, Isolde attempting to flee the cellar, but she collapsed right at the exit, consumed by the abbey's material body, now full of Margarita's life force, turning into the fine ash Elias had touched. And the whispering reverter? It was Margarita's echo, yearning to return, dissolved and dispersed into thousands of stones, forced to witness the world through the eyes of the empty Gothic windows. All these details made Elias shudder. Isolde was not the ghost. The ghost was the living will of a coerced structure, driven by the eternal pain of a young girl. He felt the need to find more evidence of the anchor before the abbey woke up completely. Chapter 5. The encounter in the nun's cell. At this point, Elias knew he couldn't simply leave. If he submitted the report, the investment firm would come, renovate the abbey, and perhaps unwittingly unleash something worse. He had to end this loop. He headed towards the nun's dormitory area. It was a long corridor with dozens of small cells. As he walked, he began to hear sounds of life. Not the meaningless whispering, but the noises of daily life. The rustle of linen cloth, as if someone were changing clothes. The clinking of a spoon stirring a cup. A slight, muffled cough. Elias walked to a cell with the door slightly ajar. He could see a shape inside. It was a nun, her back to him, kneeling before a simple bed for evening prayer. Her hood obscured her face. "Hello," Elias said softly, trying not to startle her. The nun did not move. "I am Elias Richter. I am inspecting the building. Can you? Who are you?" The nun's hands gripped her rosary beads. Suddenly, the rosary began to melt. Elias realized this was not a nun. This was a reenactment. As the girl slowly stood up, Elias saw the details clearly. Her body looked like it was made of ash and mist. Under the flashlight, he could see through her translucent form. And then, she turned around. Where the face should have been was only a flat, dark patch, without eyes, nose, or mouth. But Elias perceived a silent scream coming from it. From the darkness, a voice resonated, but not with a mouth. It was a thought transmitted directly into Elias's mind, in perfect Latin. Quis me. Grant me rest. Elias backed away, the flashlight falling from his hand. The figure began to approach, its gaunt fingers reaching out. This was not an attack. This was a plea. Margarita's soul was not an evil ghost, she was a victim, trapped and wanting release. I don't know how. Elias shouted. You have to tell me. The figure of Margarita pointed towards a corner of the room, where a floor tile looked looser than the others. Chapter 6, The Curse of Aegidius and the War with Stone. Elias understood the gesture. He used the crowbar to pry up the stone tile. Beneath it was not a tomb, but a small, old lead box. When he opened the box, inside was an object wrapped in silk. It was a human finger bone, wrapped with a silver thread and a small piece of parchment. Elias grabbed the parchment, quickly translating. This is a part of the great Aegidius, our founder. It is his connection to the material world. Aegidius's soul has dissolved, but his desire for a lasting cult has been transferred into this bone. It is the anchor of the Abbey. As long as it remains intact, the Abbey will remain alive by the hijacked soul of Margarita. This is the truth Isolde concealed. This bone was not just a relic. It was the central object of the Black Alchemy ritual, the material anchor that kept the building alive with Margarita's soul to maintain Aegidius's perpetuity. Elias turned around. Margarita's figure was still there, but now she was smiling, or at least her empty face conveyed relief. Solve me. Release me. The voice echoed in Elias's mind. Elias understood. He had to destroy the central object. He gripped the bone tightly, feeling the horrible cold emanating from it. The silver thread wrapped around the finger bone also seemed to radiate a negative temperature, burning his skin. He bolted out of the cell, running down the main corridor. Immediately, St. Aegidius Abbey woke up. It was not a noisy awakening, it was an architectural fury. The whispering reverter erupted into a frantic scream of hundreds of nuns, but it did not come from their mouths. It erupted from every stone, every mortar line around Elias. The sound was not only painful to the ears, but also painful to the head, as if his brain was being violently shaken. A blast of cold wind rushed in from nowhere, not natural wind, but a dense, cold draft with the smell of mildew and metal. The draft formed small swirls, swirling around Elias's feet, trying to knock him down. Elias ran through the old kitchen. The crowbar he had used to pry open the trapdoor suddenly slid across the stone floor on its own, cutting across his path. He jumped over it, but nearly tripped over an inexplicably overturned iron bucket. The Abbey was trying to kill him. He ran into the courtyard. It was an open space, but now it was distorted by the ghostly presence. Faint, tall, and gaunt shadows of the nuns were appearing in the empty windows, not to scare him, but to obstruct his vision. He found the old, abandoned well. The well was deep and dark, and according to legend, it led to an inexhaustible underground stream, a perfect bottomless pit to bury the anchor. Elias stood on the edge of the well. He took the bone out of his pocket. Despite the Abbey's cold, sweat poured down his forehead. Suddenly, a terrible physical pressure bore down on his shoulders, as heavy as if a stone wall had just collapsed on him. He collapsed to his knees. A voice, but neither Isolde's nor Margarita's, echoed in his head. It was the voice of the great Aegidius, ancient, authoritative, and desperate. You cannot destroy me, mortal. I am perpetuity. You will not end these centuries of existence. Surrender the connection. Join and become part of this eternal architecture. Elias groaned under the weight. His hand clenched the bone, which the supernatural cold had made numb. The finger bone, wrapped in silver, began to vibrate violently in his palm. He saw the blood vessels under his skin look ready to burst from the pressure. No! Elias roared, his voice hoarse. This is not perpetuity. This is torture. He used the last iron will of a man who believed in physics to fight against the metaphysical. He tried to stand up. Just then, the Abbey employed its final psychological attack. A sound of heartbreaking sobbing erupted right next to his ear, Margarita's cry, full of pain, but not begging for release. It was a cry of guilt. I can't take it anymore. Reverter. Let me go back. Don't throw it. Water won't free me. It will just be another dispersion. The girl's despair echoed through his mind. Elias faltered. Had he been wrong? Would destroying the anchor cause her soul more agony? But then, he remembered the empty, pleading gaze in the nun's cell. Please me. Grant me rest. She had pointed him to it. She wanted this. No, Elias told himself. She is being forced to lie. He braced his feet against the well's edge, strained to stand upright, the bone still in his hand, now hot as a burning coal. He looked down into the black abyss of the well. I free you, he whispered. He used all his strength, hurling the silver-wrapped bone away. It flew in an arc through the air, the silver flashing momentarily in the darkness. Clang! The sound of impact sank deep into the well's bottom, followed by the sound of water boiling violently and splashing everywhere. Immediately, silence. It was not the silence of death, but the silence of surrender. The screaming stopped. The wind ceased. The shadows vanished instantly, dissipating into the air like smoke. The bone-chilling cold vanished, replaced by the natural, comfortable cold of the black forest night. The gates and stone walls stopped shaking. Elias collapsed onto the ground, panting. He had survived a war with an haunted structure. He looked at his hand. Where the bone had rested was a white-gray cold burn, like one caused by liquid nitrogen. Elias turned back to the Abbey. Now, it was just a stone structure again, old, decaying, but empty. Chapter 7, The Final Echo and the Concluding Report. Elias leaned against his car, catching his breath. It took him an hour to calm down enough to go back inside. He went to the nun's cell where Margarita had appeared. She was gone, but on the loose stone tile where the lead box had been, lay a single, pure white daisy. Elias bent down and picked it up. It was a real flower. Perhaps the wind had blown it in. Or perhaps it was a final word of thanks. He returned to the circular cellar, looking at the stone platform. There was no more sulfur smell, no more feeling of sharp cold. It was just an old storage room. The vessel had been neutralized. Elias had completed his mission. He had evaluated St. Aegidius Abbey. He drafted his final report. Architectural and Structural Condition Report, Summary, Structure, St. Aegidius Abbey Condition, structurally unstable. Evidence of intentional damage and non-standard architectural changes in the lower cellar. Recommendation, NO investment for renovation. The structure must be sealed and controlled demolition is advised for safety reasons. The cost of repair would exceed the potential property value, and the risk of collapse is extremely high. Elias knew this was a lie. The Abbey could stand for decades more. But this was the only way for him to ensure no one else uncovered what had been buried and was now free. Before leaving, he removed the memory card from his camera. All the photos of the chapel with the blurred figure had vanished. The memory card was clean, containing only the usual measurement and survey shots. As the sun rose, Elias drove out of the Abbey gate. He didn't look back. But as the car rolled past the stone gate, he heard a small sound, very close, right next to his ear. Not the collective whispering, but a single, clear, and warm voice of a young girl. "Gracias." "Thank you." Elias started. He looked in the rearview mirror. There was no one. He continued driving, with a faint smile. Finally, he had freed a trapped soul. He had found something that science and architecture could not explain, and he had kept it to himself. St. Aegidius Abbey still stood, a silent ruin in the Black Forest. But it was no longer a living vessel. It was just a tomb of stone, where the whispering had finally found rest. And Elias Richter, the skeptical architect, had become the keeper of the terrifying truth of Black Alchemy. The immortality of a building is built on the destruction of a soul. Chapter 8, Epilogue. 6 months passed, but for Elias, that time barely existed. It was just a hazy gap between the screaming of St. Aegidius Abbey and the return to normalcy. He had returned to his modern, minimalist apartment in Munich, but he no longer saw logic in the straight lines, steel, and glass. The cold burn on the back of his hand remained, a white-gray scar. It didn't hurt, but it was always colder than the rest of his body, a physical reminder of where he had been. Elias's report was accepted. The investment firm followed his recommendation, sealing the entire Black Forest area around the Abbey and declaring it structurally unsound property. St. Aegidius was locked away, cut off from the world like a body isolated from its life source. Elias tried to return to work. But for an architect specializing in preservation, every ancient building was now a torment. He no longer saw rotten wood or cracked stone. He saw the despair of the builders, the fears trapped in the mortar, and the anger of a history buried. One afternoon, while walking through a crowded, modern subway station, he suddenly felt a familiar chill. It was not a natural cold. It was an echoing cold. And then he heard it. Not the terrifying collective whispering of the nuns, but a single, faint sigh in Latin, lost between the train noises and the pushing crowd. Semper vigilans. Always watchful. Elias stopped in the middle of the crowd. He looked up at the concrete wall, with no windows, no stone niche. Nothing. He suddenly realized, destroying the anchor had freed Margarita's soul, but it did not erase the understanding that Black Alchemy had instilled in him. He had become a spiritual conductor. Now, he could feel the breath of every ancient structure in the world. Elias Richter was no longer a skeptic. He had become an architect of the supernatural, forever haunted by the terrifying truth that every eternal building requires a price paid with a soul. He knew he couldn't tell anyone. He had found peace for Margarita, but he had lost his own peace to the Whispering Abbey in the Black Forest. He adjusted his tie, taking a deep breath of the station's echoing cold air. His next project was the restoration of an old castle in Romania. He smiled bitterly. His search for haunted architecture had just begun. E&D.